Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, we were waiting just a little bit to see if more people were entering the room, but we are going to start. Um, I would like to introduce our guest this evening. Um, our guest will be our facilitator. Our facilitator's name is Alethia Cadore. Did I pronounce your last name right? And just to give you a brief intro, and Alethea will also tell you in terms of who she is and her specialty. Um, Alethea is a child and youth practitioner, a restorative justice mediator, a psychotherapist. Her expertise is in trauma and helping those cope with anxiety, depression, and workplace stress and racialization. Um, Alethea is an amazing person. She does amazing work in the community. And I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and share a little bit more about herself before I get into the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, John. And
Welcome.
I just want to say good evening to everyone that made it here tonight. I also want to thank Nicole and the Kajenga Wellness team for having me. And my background, most of my work is in trauma. I am an educator. I taught trauma and intervention in colleges. And I've also developed my own Mind's Eye like education and education executive leadership program. I like to combine most of the work that I've done in psychiatry and crisis work into um, building with the community and also giving them the mental health education that they need so that they can be aware of some of the things that are affecting us and also have some tools that they can use to try and make some changes. And when I started Mind's Eye Like consulting and community practice, in 2020, it was a call to action to have more visible psychotherapists of color working with our community. And I felt it was a good time for me to open up my practice and work with people that might be facing challenges in their work or in their personal life, learn how to manage their emotions, regulate those emotions so that they can um, set proper goals for themselves and also create a wellness plan that integrates some type of activity so that they can maintain work-life integration and make better choices for themselves and lead with confidence. And I find since I've been working with various people from across the community and leaders, one thing that we really haven't really talked a lot about is how to manage your thoughts. So that's what we're going to be doing today.
Is John Jack speaking? Because I can't hear.
Thank you so much. The land acknowledgement. Kajenga Wellness Project acknowledges the lands and the people of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in the friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Treaty and the traditional territory of the Mississauga, a branch of the Great Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler people until this day. Most importantly, we remember the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared story, a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. As we begin, let us pause for a moment to remember our ancestral roots and the enslaved African people that were stolen from their homelands and traveled through the transatlantic route to build on lands we know as North America. Let us honor the enslaved people who built this nation. Let us recognize the histories of Ontario and across Canada as complicit with racism of white supremacy. We recognize that these difficult histories persist in present-day racial realities. We commit to dismantling racism in all spaces, and we invite you to come together with us to create change. And just to give you a quick update in regards to Kajenga programming, we have a programming starting every Wednesday, which is for expecting mothers, for new and expecting mothers. This program, KUA, it's a really thoughtful and mindful program that supports new and expecting mothers to meet in the same space and have great conversations about entering that life. Frankiera Family Drop-In is November 3rd. The first program says October 5th, but it continues every week after that, which is Queens Unite. Also, if you're looking to be a mentor in one of our programs, please, you could scan one of the codes down there, or you can actually go to the Kajenga Wellness website and register there. To connect with us, you could connect with us via Facebook on Kajenga Wellness Project, Instagram, Kajenga Wellness, or you can go to our website, which is kajengafamily.org. So Alethia, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit throughout my screen, and you have the opportunity to upload the slides that you're going to use.
Okay, great. Okay, so can everyone hear me? I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to be presenting today. And I know the topic is healthy mind, healthy you. And I want us to really start focusing on really paying attention to our thoughts And when we pay attention to our thoughts, how we can shift some of that negative thinking pattern into something that is more positive and more helpful for us, so that we're able to receive more positive things through mindfulness. So my background is in CBT, and I have been trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. And people usually ask me, what is cognitive behavioral therapy? Well, there's when we're in this field, we have various treatment modalities that we use to engage with our clients, and also to develop some type of rapport, so that we're able to get some information, support the person through their challenge or crisis, and hopefully help them through that crisis, so that they're feeling more centered, they're feeling more restored, and they're able to manage some of those emotions that would have caused them some distress. There was a psychiatrist by the name of Aaron Beck. In the 1960s, he had his private practice, and he was seeing a lot of people. And he noticed a pattern of people coming into his office presenting with similar symptoms. And what those symptoms were really centered around the way that they felt about themselves, the way that they viewed some of the challenges that were happening in their life, and their perception of what those challenges were and how they affected them. What he noticed was a continuing pattern. And from this continuing pattern, he developed about 8 to 10 cognitive distortions, or what we call unhelpful thinking patterns, that he noticed when people were feeling sad, worried, feeling disconnected with their past, and also really concerned about their future. And he decided that he would write down what these distortions were, and come up with some type of solution or formula to help people feel more settled and ease them from having that continuing pattern of distress. So I'm going to go through what those cognitive distortions are, and I'll give you a quick example, and then you can tell me, do these things sound familiar to you once I've shared with you what they look like? So the first one is overgeneralization. And this usually happens a lot, where we think about a situation, and then we've automatically come to the conclusion that in this situation, one thing happens and it's going to happen across the board with everything else. And usually when I think of overgeneralization is when people come to work late. So, and people will have a perception that once that person is late, they're going to be late in everything that they do. And is that a pattern? Sometimes it can be. But let's look at the root of why this might be happening. So we're going to hold that there. And that is one example. They think of one thing, and then they think across the board, it's going to happen everywhere in all aspects of their life all the time. The next one is catastrophizing. And it's a type of thinking that leads people to think the worst is going to happen. And people that really think the worst is going to happen, what happens? They start getting really anxious. They start getting heart palpitations. Whatever they've concluded, that is it. That is definitely going to happen, right? And when have we seen this type of catastrophizing event or situation? You might be planning an event, and you're looking at the forecast, and it says it might rain that day. And you're like, oh my gosh, I put all my time into planning, and just because it's Saturday and it says rain, I just automatically think, you know what, my whole day is going to be ruined because when Saturday comes, they're going to rain on my parade, and that's it for me. When in fact, was there anything that said how long it was going to rain for, how hard it was going to rain for, and what time? No, we just saw that one thing, and then we just automatically concluded that that was it. So, sounds kind of familiar there. The next one is, well, are these things connected? Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes it could be connected based on, you know, a situation that you probably had experienced in your past, and you were thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be happening to me again. But there wasn't really any evidence, right? Because one day one thing might really work well, and then for some reason, by no control of your own, it might not always work out that way. So sometimes they can be connected, or sometimes they may not be. But to always automatically assume that, there could be some type of a situation there that we really need to look into. Now, mind reading. When people assume that they know what others are thinking, they're resorting to mind reading. And I'm sure you've had this happen when you're with a group of friends and people are just relaxing or socializing, and you might have a thought on your mind. You haven't said anything, but someone will automatically say to you, I know exactly what you're thinking, and I knew you were going to say that. And you're like, hold on. How would you even know that that was the same thing that I was thinking at that time? It may have been a coincidence that you might have automatically knew what I was going to say, but there was nothing that kind of linked that evidence to make you automatically assume that you know exactly what's on my mind. Like, you know, sometimes we could just be in tune with people, and we're just like, boom, you know exactly what they're going to say. And people say, hey, that's my twin. They know exactly what I'm thinking at the same time. And hey, that could be just because of the fact that you've hung around each other a lot. You might just know their flow and their values, but it doesn't automatically assume that just, you know, by you knowing them, that you're automatically going to know what they're thinking and how they're thinking. See if I can go on to the next. Oops. The next one, emotional reasoning. Now, with emotional reasoning, you assume that your negative emotions necessarily reflect the way things are. So if you're feeling that way, then it must be automatically true. Now, let me give you an example of that. You might have had an argument with a friend or your partner, and you might have felt a certain wound or a trigger in that argument. And for some reason in that argument and the way that it could have transpired, you probably would have felt hurt, you would have felt disappointed or a little bit frustrated. And with that, you might think, okay, well, since I'm feeling hurt and frustrated, maybe that person doesn't care about me anymore. Or maybe that person just doesn't love me anymore because we had such a bad argument. I'm not sure if they ever want to connect with me again. There wasn't necessarily any evidence of that. Maybe when you are feeling hurt and sad, those are your automatic feelings. But then to assume that other people are thinking the same way is a little bit faulty there. And that's something that we really need to look into. Just because you're upset, it doesn't mean that that's the end of the relationship. It could be that at that time, you could have been feeling upset, or that person was quite emotional, and that could be it. But to think and to conclude that, that person may not want you anymore, or they're rejecting their relationship, that might be a little bit extreme in your thinking. Unless that person made it clear to you that, hey, this is it. Maybe you broke a boundary, or maybe there was some type of value that the person was concerned about. But to automatically think that, oh, if that person is angry with me, that means that they don't like me or they don't care. It doesn't necessarily mean that those thoughts match up with what's the reality of what's going on in the situation. Excuse me. And, I find that this next statement is a classic statement that we have mostly could have shared or said from time to time. And, when we have a pile of work to do and we're not all motivated to do it, and you know that there's some things that you like, but you're like, you know what, let me just go on a break and let me scroll on my Instagram for a little bit before I get into my pile of work. What are those messages that come filtering through? You should be doing your work right now. There's other things that you could be doing than going on Instagram. You have things that you need to focus on, right? And when all those statements start flooding in, the would have, the should have, the could have, I must have, does that really motivate you to get on your pile of work? I know sometimes when I start having those thoughts that I should have done this, oh my gosh, it could be so exhausting. And I'm just wondering, when I hear these statements, right, what happens? Sometimes with those emotions, we're giving ourselves some really hard consequences. Well, maybe we just need a little break, and then we will go back into our work. But when we start piling on those should haves, would haves, could haves, there's a song like that, right? And he says the same thing, that he should have been better. He should have treated the person a little bit nicer. And, all those things are called emotional consequences, which kind of rack up a lot of guilt that we feel, because one hand we're supposed to be, but for some reason we're having a little bit of a barrier. And it might not be seen as a negative thing, but because of the fact that we put a lot of consequences on our thoughts and our actions, it's starting to weigh us down. And that negative thinking, yeah, it leads to other things where the shame comes in and the guilt, because you might not be motivated at that moment to tackle that pile of responsibilities. And you just need a little bit of a break. But for some reason, you're not able to give yourself that break. You're more hard on yourself because you're like, oh, I should be doing this. Or have you ever had a conversation with someone, and during the heat of the moment, you might have missed some things? But then when you take some time to yourself to self-reflect, and then you're like, oh man, there's so many things I could have said. And when we look at that statement, we don't see it as a positive statement. We see it more as a negative statement, because you're building up all this anticipation and putting so much pressure on yourself, when maybe at that moment, at that time, that's all you could have responded with. And that would have been okay. And self-reflection is a good thing, because, yeah, it helps us process when we're away from the heated situation. And it also gives you some perspective. John, did you want to ask me a question? I see your hand up. So.
Yes. So what you were saying there definitely resonates with me.
Okay.
Especially in a situation, for instance, if you are either with a friend or if you're in public and they do something to disrupt your spirit.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you tell them what you want to tell them. And then when you're on your way home, you're like, I wish I should have said this. And I hate that shoulda, coulda, because I never let it go. like my brain just keeps on saying, you should have said this, you should have really put them in their place, like all that kind of stuff. And you're like, and it's already gone. The situation's gone. You said what you said, let it go, move on. But sometimes it just keeps replaying back because you would have wished for a different outcome.
That's it. That is it. And that's the thing, right? When we're going through that heated situation, or maybe for ourselves, John, which was a great explanation. You know, like you could have had a lot of things on your mind at the time, and maybe you weren't really cued in to the situation of what was happening. And that's what I'm saying. When you have that time to step back, then you're like, one or two things could have come up, but that's okay. That's when we have to really start giving ourselves a little bit more empathy there. And if you do have the opportunity to see the person again, then I would make a point of it, of probably going back and just going over some of the things that I could have missed. But other than that, you're right, John, there might not be that opportunity. So sometimes it's all it is, and we have to just kind of let that go. Because sometimes when we're in the moment, we might not have had all the tools, but we have to be able to just be gentle with ourselves at that time and just say, you know what, if you have the opportunity again, then feel free to make a point of it and just say to the person, hey, you know, I really gave it some thought, and there's some things that I really need to, you know, connect with you on. But then if not, then we have to just say, okay, lesson learned. What did I learn from this, so that the next time I get into a situation, I might not be a little bit flustered or anxious. I'll be able to process some things and really get that response that I really wanted to, because of course I want to have a different outcome. And I think that is so important that we address that. And I'm definitely going to hold that. And then we're going to come back to it, because that is one key thing that I think some of us miss when we are engaging and interacting, and then having some thoughts of how do we actually get our point across and make sure things are clear, so that we're not missing things and having to go back and, you know, starting to feel all bad about ourselves, when this is not about feeling bad. It's just about being aware, so that we can deal with situations a little bit differently. Thanks for that. So just to continue, you know, it goes on to the same thing, right? When we're, you know, dealing with someone and we're quite heated, and, you know, maybe we were able to let them know exactly how we feel, but then we're getting into the accusatory, which is another negative point of communication that, you know what, realistically, we have gotten into this. And I know I've done this myself, when I'm like, you should be doing this. And, you know, it's really hard for me to feel comfortable around you, because I feel like I have to get an answer right away. And when you're listening to my language, is that something that sounds inviting and sounds like I'm really giving someone some positive support and feedback? No, I'm accusing them. I'm kind of getting them into my way of wanting them to act. We're not even thinking about what the situation is and what could be causing that person to react in that way. But I'm just piling on my perception and my thoughts onto the situation, because I'm not really asking them what's going on here. I'm just saying to them, well, you know, I'm not liking what I'm seeing. I'm not liking what's happening. You should be better. I'm expecting more from you, and I must see change. And when you're dealing with someone that might be quite aggressive in their language, and really giving their point across without really looking at what's happening with you, I mean, this is another part of that negative thought pattern that we sometimes get caught into, because of the way that we're feeling about the situation. So I might be receiving something and I'm feeling hurt and I'm feeling disappointed. And instead of just expressing my feelings, I'm just going around and I'm turning it around on you, and I'm accusing you and I'm blaming you for some of these things that are happening. without looking at the whole picture and the dynamic of what could be happening. And I know sometimes we get really irritated. We don't want to hear from the person. We don't want to talk to them. But, you know, if we're really trying to show them a corrective way and of expressing their emotions, then we have to be able to reciprocate and demonstrate that, hey, we're not pleased about something, and we should be able to use that words that reflect that. Instead of blaming and accusing, we can use more gentle and softer language, like, I'm disappointed, I was frustrated when I noticed things were happening, or, hey, you know, what's happening here? I'm noticing some behaviors that I haven't noticed before, and it's really concerning me. Can we talk about that? And I find that, you know, people are more open to this type of reception instead of being blamed and accused. And then if I just ask them, hey, what's happening? Can you just help me to understand what's going on? They take that in a different way, and they seem to be more open and receptive to respond and reciprocate in a different way, in a more healthier way. And again, that goes with the labeling, mislabeling, right? Attaching a negative label to yourself instead of addressing the error. And I think people do this, and probably nonchalantly, and not even thinking that they're saying it. And, you know, you might be addressed somewhere and you're like, okay, you know, this is not an appropriate way to address me. Or, you know, you made a mistake and you messed up on something. And then instead of just saying, oh my gosh, you know, I messed up on this situation, what do we automatically say? An automatic thought someone would say would be, I'm a loser, or I messed up, oh, I'm stupid, or I'm not good at this. And, you know, it's one thing to be able to recognize and address that you might have some faults, but to actually put a negative connotation to it and to address yourself in that negative way, sometimes just giving yourself that energy, what happens? Sometimes we manifest that negative energy. So I'm always aware of how I represent myself and the things that I say to myself, because sometimes I think those thoughts become things. And I find that we can be so hard on ourselves when things aren't going the way that we wanted it to, when they're not going the way as planned, or maybe you might have had a timeline and it didn't, you know, you're noticing that what you're trying to achieve is not going to the timeline. And some people will really start to allow that to weigh heavily on them. And then they will also think, well, hey, since I'm not moving on that timeline in the way that I need to, then maybe I'm not achieving the goals that I need to. When, you know, in reality, that may not be true. Sometimes things don't always work on the timeline, and we might need to readjust or pivot. And it doesn't mean that you're not achieving it. It just means that you might need to readjust that target or readjust that goal and, you know, come up with something that is more reasonable. So instead of, you know, really having that automatic negative thought that you must be doing something wrong, which gets into the blaming and the negative connotations about yourself, you're just stepping back and just saying, hey, you know, if this is not going the way that I want it to go, maybe I just have to look at it in a different perspective or in a different way. Now, the other one here, I'm just having a hard time reading because I have this strip right across my screen. But are you able to see it on your end? It says when someone, I don't know if you can. If not, I could just go on.
When someone else's behavior irritates you, you automatically have a negative reaction towards them. They must be.
Mm-hmm. And that's just going into the same thing that you were talking about, right, John? That sometimes, automatically we can get irritated by somebody's presence. And again, that's part of the mislabeling. What is that automatic thought that comes to your mind? Oh my gosh. Or maybe we've had a friend that is going through a lot right now, and we're not really sure how to kind of put some boundaries about it. So that automatic thought that comes into your mind is like, oh my gosh, they're calling me again. What do they want? Or I know that this is going to be a little bit taxing. It's going to be a little bit exhausting. I mean, you're not saying that you don't want to hear from them, but maybe because of what's been happening over time, you know that their situation is draining your energy. And you're like, oh my gosh, so that automatic thought comes into your mind.
Yes.
Or maybe you have a partner that, they always call you when you're just about to go into a live, or you're going into work and you're like, okay, what is it now? But in fact, it's not that you don't want to receive them. Maybe there could be a lot of things going on for you. And just at that moment, you had that automatic reaction. And then it will slowly disappear. Doesn't mean that you always think that way about them all the time. And the last one, disqualifying the positive. And you reject positive experiences by insisting they don't count for some reason or another. And in this way, you maintain that negative belief that is contradicted by your everyday experiences. So an example of that would be, you walking into a room and someone compliments you on your attire, and they're like, wow, like you look really great. And you're like, yeah, this whole thing, I had that in my closet about 10 years now. What? So instead of receiving, the compliment, which could also, really radiate your day and really add to some of the positive feedback, you just decided to dismiss what that person was saying, and you just focused on something else, which brought it a different type of energy. And, just think about that. Has there been a situation that someone had complimented you, and instead of receiving or reciprocating the compliment, you said, oh, this whole thing, or you just dismissed it, or you didn't really receive it? I'm sure we've had those times and those
What if,
situations when that's happened.
what if they're being sarcastic?
Well, I mean, I guess you would have to know that person, and I would probably
Yeah.
ask them, like, are you being sarcastic? But usually when someone goes out of their way to compliment you, right?
Mhm.
Even if they're doing it for a joke, they're doing it because, they see something in you and they just want to get your attention, right? So
Yeah.
they might just look at something and just say, hey, wow, I just noticed that on you, or, and I find that that's one thing that we don't do a lot for each other, is to just validate each other and let people know how happy we are to see them, or how great they look, or if they're doing something well. Hey, I really like how you did that. Sometimes people really find it hard because maybe they've had some past trauma where they were in a situation, or maybe they grew up in a family where they weren't validated. So every time they hear something good about them, they're like looking around and they're like, who, me? When in fact, yes, that comment was towards you, and that we can see good things in people, even though other people can't. So when you look at these cognitive distortions, do they sound a little bit familiar? Have there been times when you probably could have said this, or you've heard it from others, and you're like, wow, I never really knew that this could be part of something in my thinking that other people have experienced? Sometimes we think, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that's sitting with these thoughts. When in fact, no, the studies were out from Aaron Beck, that said, yeah, these are patterns of thinking styles that people have that haven't been helpful. And when you stick on these negative thinking patterns and you ruminate, sometimes it leads to anxiety and it also leads to depression. So he was trying to look at identifying what are those things that are persistent that cause us some stress. And he's like, hey, I want you guys to just stop and pay attention to these things so that when you start realizing and recognizing that it's happening, you can say, oh, that thinking style is very distorted. It's not helping me right now. What can I do to shift my thoughts from this negative thinking style to something that is a little bit more positive and more helpful? Now, when people started hearing about CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy, basically what we're looking at is reframing your thoughts and things that weren't unhelpful to you to things that are just a little bit more pleasing for you. And the reason why we want people to shift away from the negative thinking, because it does lead to disease. So in order for our mind to be healthy and for us to have really good thoughts, we got to pay attention to what we're thinking and what we're saying, because it does affect us. And most of the people that I've seen in my practice that are now adults, they were wounded children. And there could have been some things that were said to them, and the way that it was interpreted has affected them. And they find it really hard to change those thinking patterns. So when we look at the thinking styles and how we actually think, right? It's called the cognitive triad. And this is something that we use in CBT to really start talking to people about those negative thinking patterns. And the first thing is, when you get a thought, you notice how that thought affects you, whether it's negative or it's positive. It creates a certain feeling attached to it. And you know, everyone has that thought, right? It's called when you're in your feelings. What happens? We start thinking really heavily about it, and we give some energy to it. And when we're thinking about our emotions, which are energy in motion, it's the frustration, it's the anxiety, the worry. Sometimes it's a little bit of shame that we could be feeling, or some guilt. Those emotions are attached with a certain type of behavior. And what happens when we're disappointed, for example, or we're frustrated? Those thoughts create feelings. And what happens when someone is frustrated or anxious or angry? They act out. That is the behavior that we are seeing that gives us the alarm signal that says, hey, there's something happening here that we needed to pay attention to. And what happens when we're noticing that behavior, right? We're saying, why is that person acting that way? So it is reinforcing the emotions that they're feeling because they're angry. But they're having some difficulty expressing that with their words. So they're showing us in their behavior. And when we're looking at that behavior, it reinforces what we're thinking, right? Because we're seeing how they're acting. And then we're like, okay, well, now that person's acting out, I know that they're angry because I could see it in the way that they're acting. So how do you break that cycle? We interrupt it by looking at those interventions, right? And it's going back to what could be causing that behavior? Why are they reacting in the way that they're acting? Yes, you're angry, which is a reaction to a thought or a feeling, which is I was feeling scared. I was feeling frustrated. I was feeling worried. And because of the fact that I couldn't express those feelings at the time, I'm showing you in my behavior. And you can apply this for young people. You can see it, in your everyday relationships. And we can also see it when people are not feeling good about themselves, right? Because when you look at those distortions, it's all based on how that person was reacting and feeling and their perception of the reality at the time. And through that, we're able to interpret a message. And that's why I tell people, not all thoughts are facts, because there could have been somewhere along that emotional wheel that we weren't able to express ourselves, or we didn't have the ability to. So we're showing it in a different way. But do our thoughts become things? Yeah. And I remember working with one client, and he was a young offender, and he said to me, "Miss, my thoughts are facts." Because if I'm in an area and someone's going to attack me, I'm going to know for sure that they're going to attack me. And I'm like, hold on a minute. So everywhere you go, so you're always going to think someone's going to attack you? He's like, "Miss, I have a lot of enemies." And I'm like, okay. So maybe for him, he might have to, think about where he's going, right? But for the majority of us that are just living our day-to-day lives, yeah, depends on how we interact and engage with people. We're going to notice a behavior pattern over a period of time, and then we are going to notice those changes. But where does it lead back to? Some of those negative, unhelpful distortions that they were thinking at the time. So our goal is to actually catch those things before they become unhelpful, and then they become detrimental to us, because then it turns into anxiety, depression, and then disease. So how do we understand our thoughts and to interrupt them before they become detrimental to us? Now, I wish I can enlarge in this, but this is the pathway of us kind of understanding how our thoughts become things. Now, in order for us to really stay on the positive side of our thought process, we have to really understand where our thoughts and our pleasure system comes from. Now, when we're looking at the way the brain functions and the way that we think, we have 4 neural pathways in our brain that lead to pleasure, and we call it the happy hormones. So we talked a little bit about those negative thoughts and those negative thinking patterns, but how do we shift our thinking and stay more positive, stay more relaxed, stay in a more pleasant mood? And we can't always do this all the time, but I think if we're able to understand that we do have neural pathways that lead to us being happy, we can actually shift the way that we think about things in a negative way and not really focus on it and stick on it for too long. Because when we get stuck on it, that's when we ruminate, and then it's hard to break away from that thinking. But if we're able to look at what causes us to be more positive and stay in a more happier or pleasant mood, then we can learn how to shift those thoughts and stay more on that positive, optimistic side, which helps us build more resilience and helps us to reduce our stress. So when I'm looking at understanding hormones, this is exactly how the pathways are in our brain. And if you look at the center of my diagram there, we're giving you those 4 points in the brain and where they're located. And what we say is, in order for you to stay on that positive side, you got to dose up on your happy hormones. And I love the fact that this acronym is just automatically organic, right? You're talking about the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, and the endorphins. And a lot of neuroscientists are really tapping into this now and showing people that, hey, even though you have a negative thought, yes, it could enter the brain and stay there. However, there's ways that you can naturally heal yourself so that you don't always have to focus on the negative. There's a way of changing those neural pathways in the brain, which leads you to feeling better about yourself, feeling more relaxed, feeling more positive. And when you're focusing on these hormones, it's known to increase your trust, your well being, and to give you more of a calm mood so that you're feeling more happier and you're able to create good habits. And when I'm sharing in our community about dose, a lot of people are saying to me, wow, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And I'm like, yeah, you're absolutely right, because I can't even tell you if I remembered reading this in high school. I just happened to go to college and university, and I heavily studied psychology. So this would come up all the time. But for the common everyday person, they're like, wow. I mean, when I hear about oxy, I think about other things. They're not thinking about oxytocin, right? Because you have that drug called Oxycontin, and then oxy, there's that detergent that you put and it helps oxidize your clothing and makes it more brighter. But when you think about it, it's kind of similar to the same thing, right? It's about really removing some of those negative webs that we have. And it's just helping you look at things in a little bit more of a positive way. So for dopamine, they call that the reward hormone. It's the one that really makes you feel good. And, we're always talking about dopamine, especially for people that are music lovers, right? What's the first thing that you put on when you're not feeling that great? Is that music. And what does that music do? Those short, quick hits. It automatically changes your mood. And everything that you were thinking about that was probably getting you pissed off and worked up, what happens when you put on your favorite song? It might go away temporarily, but maybe the heatedness that you were feeling at the time could have dissipated because you've kind of switched your thinking and did something that made you feel a little bit better about yourself so that you can kind of reframe your perspective. And also with dopamine, that helps you with your concentration. It helps you with your learning and your mood and your memory and your attention. So people that are suffering from depression, this is one area that you can tell that someone may be experiencing some mood difficulties when they're feeling withdrawn, they're feeling sad, they're not feeling any pleasure in any activities. I start to look at this and say, hey, there's a dopamine issue there. And since they have low mood, what are those things that help you improve your mood? Now we have Instagram, and people are saying scrolling, it's not healthy. But you know what? If you're feeling down and you just want to look for a couple of minutes, it might be that temporary relief that you need. Now, people are measuring how many hours you're spending on Instagram, and that could be seen as escapism. But if it's something that's short, quick, and you just need something to lift up your mood, then yeah, you would do activities that increase your dopamine. Now with oxytocin, that's our love hormone. And that's the hormone that we use, when you get those butterflies, when you first meet somebody, or maybe you had a really stimulating conversation, and there's a lot of stimulating conversations that are going on right now in the media, right? And you could have been all on those conversations. And then you notice once you're finished with those conversations, you're feeling really good, you're smiling, or maybe you read a post and it had a lot of drama in it, and you're like, I'm here for the tea. And all you do is go straight to the comments, right? And that's your thing that's like, oh, that makes me feel really relaxed. That makes me feel like fun. And that could be your mood there, and that improves your mood. Also, for mothers, there's a lot of oxytocin in breast milk. And when your child is a little bit fussy and you're trying to get them on a regular system, right? The breastfeeding helps because it helps the child feel connected, helps the child feel relaxed, and also it keeps that bond, right? And now I read that people are selling this milk for people. And I'm like, wow, I don't know if it would have the same effect, but that would be interesting to find out if it does, right? And I think this is a lot that I talk to young people about, especially when they're, entering a relationship, that when you get that arousal and those good feelings, that's your oxytocin. And when you're feeling really close to somebody and you're in that love mood, that's those stars that we see, right? And that's all that love hormone. And I find when we get older, there seems to be an absence of the oxytocin. And that's where some people might get into addiction. They might get into unhealthy relationships because they're really chasing that hormone. You get it the first time you fall in love with someone, right? And then you're like, oh, I want to still have that feeling all the time. But the reality is, it doesn't always happen all the time. Sometimes those feelings fade, and that's okay. But, for some people, chasing that feeling, is what they really enjoy. And I can appreciate that, and I understand why. Because it really helps them feel, a little bit more secure and feel that they can trust people. But then it also can increase other people's stress, right? And serotonin. When have you noticed when serotonin can help you regulate your mood and your behavior? And people talk about serotonin in the mind and also in the gut. And when people are feeling anxious or they're feeling worried, what's the first thing they feel? Are those butterflies? Or they're not feeling like they're in connection or at one with themselves and they're feeling a little bit scattered. It's always good to check out the serotonin. What are those things that help create the calmness? And when someone is feeling depressed, we look at both areas, the serotonin, and we also look at the dopamine. And that's when people are maybe prescribed mood stabilizers because they want you to increase the serotonin too. And once you're increasing your serotonin, it helps you stay calm and it helps regulate your mood. And the last one is endorphins. And I think that one is pretty much straightforward. Everybody knows about endorphins. What are those chemicals that are produced that help you relieve stress and relieve some of that pain, frustration that you might be feeling? Endorphins produce a feeling of euphoria that just helps you feel a great sense of relief. And what happens once you have that release and your endorphins are kicking in, your colors start to improve. The greens look more green, blues look more blue. Have you ever noticed that when after a workout, or maybe you went for a walk in nature and you came back and everything just looked so brighter, just more relaxed, and you're like, yeah, I could really focus on my day. That's how some people get their morning routine on. The first thing is they go for a workout or they do something just to release some of that stress. so that they can think clearly and probably last a little bit more with their energy throughout the day by releasing some of those endorphins, because that's what helps you release some of that energy and stress. So, any questions around dose? Is this the first time that people have heard about it?
No, I've definitely heard about each and every one of those, especially working with youth that have been through several forms of trauma,
Yeah,
um, and how each and every one of these kind of affects their living standards.
yeah,
Um, so the dopamine, well, from using different forms of, if it's different drugs or narcotics or whatever it is, it overrides their dopamine,
mm-hmm.
like their natural reward system. And then they kind of rely on that in order to feel that kind of euphoric feeling and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
I
yeah.
I hear you. Especially working with people that have been in that survivor mode for a very long time. They're
Yes.
constantly in the fight flight response, which does affect your dopamine and your serotonin,
Mhm.
and that we call it hypervigilance.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of a trauma response from post-traumatic stress. And it takes a while for people to really calm down that amygdala, which is that part of the brain which is right near to the right, to the bottom stem of the brain. And when that becomes activated and you're constantly living in that flight fight mode, wow, it does a lot to your brain and to the rest of your body. So yeah, it's a good idea, and I can see why people will use addictions, because they're in that high state and they're not really sure what to do to keep them calm. So they will turn to addictions to help regulate um, that flight fight response. Absolutely.
What I find interesting about this though is I didn't know about the gastrointestinal.
Yeah.
The majority of them had horrible diets. They weren't eating well, maybe one meal a day, if that. And that was contributing to some of the behavioral patterns that were happening during school and stuff like that.
Makes sense. Yeah. And
Mm.
that's why I support any school that has a breakfast program, because we really don't know where people are coming from. Even adults too that might have a really heavy morning. Sometimes you're just in that rush. But if you know that there's a place where you can go and just get a little meal, something of sustenance just to help you with that gut health, then I think it's so imperative that we continue those programs, because they're needed. And especially when you're working with young people that are facing trauma, this is going to take a while for them to really learn how to regulate their mood, like I said before. And yeah, they have to have this education and to really understand how their mind and their body works, because I find that sometimes we don't always share that information, especially if you're in gym class. You hardly get a health class, or sometimes there'll be so many other topics, but we don't really focus that much on this, which is how do we make ourselves regulated through our mood and through our thoughts. So usually when I'm doing this, we have like groups of people and we can break up into different groups and we can talk about things. But I like the fact that we have a small group tonight and we can go through this case study together. And basically what I want to find out from people is, let's identify what could be causing this person to have some struggles and to have some stress. And now that we kind of figured out what type activities or we can identify what could be causing them to have this mood regulation, what are 2 or 3 things that we can implement to help them feel better about themselves and to build resilience and to help them enhance their mood? So I'm going to read it. So Amanda, she is a university student and she's an international student. So she's not from Canada, but she emigrated to Canada and she's on a student visa. And she happened to find a room that she could share with 2 other women that were from her country. This is a second winter away from home. She notices that she's having some difficulty staying awake. Her classes start at 10 a.m. and one of her classes is online and one of them is in person. She notices that when it's time for class online, she logs in right at 5 to 10. But when it comes to going in person, she's not always able to make it. She has friends in the class, so they're able to give her notes. I can't read that line there, but she takes notes. However, I don't think she's able to focus and concentrate that well on her notes.
Yes, that's the line. She takes notes. However, when reviews them, they are unclear, disorganized.
Yeah. She has an exam on Friday, and now she's getting worried and she's getting stressed. And look at the statement. I should be studying. Maybe I should drop out. Or maybe I should try harder. So she's really starting to panic now because she's trying her best, but for some reason there's something there that's kind of stopping her from achieving the success that she would like. So she's thinking about all these things, and then she starts getting a headache. She lies down and she misses her in-person class for the 3rd time. So what do you think is going on with Amanda right now? Let's identify one of those cognitive distortions that are kind of written out. And what do you think would be helpful for her to help her stay focused and regulate her mood? So I know it's a lot, but we can get through it. And then there's only 2 more slides after that. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. So we're looking at what could be going on with her. She's an international student, which I think we should pay attention to. She's making it to one class, but then she's not making it to the other class. She's not focused and she's sleeping. What do you think's happening? You can come off your on mute and you can tell me, or you could drop it in the chat.
Would we be able to go back 2 slides?
Sure. This one?
No, not that one. Yes.
Okay. And, we can kind of put it into context, right, for ourselves. Like, if we were away from home, it's our 2nd year away from home, it's winter time. I know what that's like for me.
Yeah, so she's probably like homesick and maybe experiencing experiencing a little bit of SAD,
Yeah.
season affective disorder, and maybe overwhelmed with their studies, or feeling inadequate, maybe English is her a second language, so if she's studying in English, maybe that's an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And she's having a hard time keeping up.
Yeah, so asking for help or feeling inadequate in the class. She's probably experiencing all of those things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. I mean, it's rough for her. And it's her second year. And I don't know who those girls are that she's living with. I mean, I don't know if they're supportive or not, but she's really getting into that negative thinking pattern, right? Of, oh, I should be staying up. I should be doing this. And she's not able to do it. And it's really weighing her down. Absolutely.
Yes, this resonates with me also because when I was teaching and supporting international students, a lot of things that came up was just not being comfortable in your new space yet. Even when you're up to like your third year, still not being settled in, because there's a couple of cultural pieces that could be missing at times, especially food. Sometimes you don't have readily access to the foods that you traditionally eat. Also, just a sense of community. Even though there's people from your same culture within your educational institution, it doesn't mean when they say sometimes your skin folk is not your kinfolk. Not necessarily being able to connect with everyone within your culture and having this accountability partner. Sometimes in those spaces, like everybody for themselves, and it poses a lot of challenges in school. So everything compiled from being homesick, like was being said, not having proper nourishment, not having someone to help them to be accountable for like following through and going to class. It just compiles. And then sometimes they end up resorting just to their dormitory in their room and just going to the online classes and not really wanting to go in person, because when you're in person, sometimes you have to answer to your professor who says, well, you're not here, your marks aren't so great, and there's a bit of embarrassment. So, I'd rather just stay in my room.
Wow. And I mean, just to not feel that lack of support or fear, it really weighs heavily on our students, even, for people that might be newcomers. And I know we were just talking about the housing crisis, just having that adjustment, and not having the basic needs that you need just to feel safe. It really plays a toll on your emotions. Absolutely. So she's developing this headache. She sleeps through class. So what do you think we can suggest to her that might be helpful, to help her enhance her mood and to kind of stay focused? Well, obviously she has to seek out some help and she has to get some support. What else do you think would be helpful for her?
It seems that she needs a realistic plan for herself, like a wellness plan.
Yeah.
What does it look like for her when she is feeling in those particular moods of anxiousness, of really not wanting to go to class? Is there a way of creating a schedule for herself where it's spaced out nicely, where maybe the 10 o'clock just doesn't work for her, and you could sometimes those same courses are repeated later on in the evening and stuff like that, so at least she has the day to kind of catch herself and do the things that she needs to do.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And in some colleges and universities, they have accommodations for their students. If you have a medical note or you've seen a psychotherapist, you can write a letter on your behalf to say, hey, you know what, maybe morning classes don't work for me. Maybe I could switch my courses around, or maybe drop a course and take it at another time, because I need to just focus on my workload. And a full-time program, you can carry 4 courses when normally you carry 6 a semester. Some places will allow you to carry 4. and you're still considered a full-time student. So it's always good to look at those options and see what's available. And also, if you're working with a therapist, or maybe you have a counselor at school, or maybe you're working in a community agency and you're noticing and experiencing that, hey, there's some students that are struggling. There's amazing people out there that you can connect with, especially with guidance, and you can advocate on your students' behalf as a guardian to say, hey, you know what? I think there's some challenges right now, but if we kind of gave them more of a flexible schedule, if the school permits that, maybe we can help that person, manage some of their emotions and help them, you know, in another way, still achieve their goals and become successful. It might take a little bit longer, but at least we can give them those options so they don't feel like they're wasting all their time and they're not going to achieve what they desire. I think that's great that we're looking at having those options for people. And also, maybe she might need to go to her doctor and consult, because international students, they do have insurance. And I find that some of them are very scared to use their insurance because for some reason they were told that if you seek mental health support, you won't be able to stay in Canada. And I let them know that that's not true. For some reason, they were like, some of my students that I've met that were international, they were told that immigration should not find out that you might have some mental health challenges, because that might be a barrier to them getting a visa. And I thought, no, that is unheard of to me. And if it is true, I'd like to talk to somebody about that, because they're under a lot of pressure. They're paying 5 times the amount of tuition that we would pay. They didn't have access to working. They can only work 25 hours a week, which is not a lot if you are paying $40,000 to $50,000 a semester. So there had to be some other ways that we can support them. Now there's scholarships for international students, and there's other ways from them to make some type of income. But before, we had so many restrictions here, which made it really hard for students to feel comfortable looking for options and asking for help, because there was that fear that they might be asked to leave. And in some places, these students were the only ones in their family that would have the ability to make a difference at home. So they couldn't afford to fail. And then we had that added pressure. I did have one student that needed to be admitted to a hospital, and that was her other concern. But with some support, she was able to finish her program, and she didn't have a penalty with immigration, which was very helpful for some of these students. So yeah, was there anything else that people would like to share or add? Because I think it's a great discussion. It sounds like, we're able to identify when people are not feeling at their greatest. And I like the fact that there's resources out there and people are really picking up on that so that we can support one another. Now, if it happens in your workplace that you've noticed that people are having difficulty concentrating, what happens there? And also for you, if you're having your own personal struggles, are you comfortable in asking for help? Do you have some activities that you can do to help shift your thoughts so that you can get the support that you need? And I think it's so important for us to pay attention to that.
I think that piece that you mentioned there can be really difficult in terms of asking for help, especially if you're not accustomed to asking for help, and if you're always accustomed just to doing things on your own and holding your own self accountable.
Yeah. Most definitely. And, that's why I always try and find that we can connect with at least one or two people. You don't need to have a lot of people in your camp, but at least one or two people that you can, develop that rapport with, that you can feel comfortable and trust, that you can share some of those thoughts with. Because you're right, depending how people receive this, it could be really scary to share because you're not really sure what people are going to do with the information. But I mean, over a period of time, developing a close relationship with one or two people that you can confide in and that could really support you in managing some of these emotions is helpful. And, if you don't feel like you do have a friend that you can confide in, that's why we're here as therapists, working in our community and looking like people in our community, because we have to start really learning how to trust one another. And I find that some people are concerned because they say, hey, I don't want all my business to be told. But what I say to people, I think it's helpful if you see me in the community. At least you know that I'm going through the same things too from day to day. And I have an understanding of what happens in our community. So sometimes I think it might be a little bit easier if you have someone that you can confide in that looks like you and understands the complexities of what it's like to grow up here. So yeah, I mean, that takes time for us to really develop, our own system of how we vet people and how we trust people with some of our intimate details. But I think it's just so helpful for us that we seek support when we can. And when it comes to support, what does that look like? What are ways that we can be really healthy and gentle with our minds and be gentle to ourselves? And I think I mentioned this when we first started the introduction of the unhelpful thinking styles. But once we start noticing and we become more aware of our thoughts, then we'll be able to apply the intervention that we need to help us stay healthy, to keep our minds healthy, which also keeps our body healthy, right? And the way that we do that is once we are aware of our thoughts, whether positive or negative, we have to start accepting that reality. Have more compassion for ourselves. And what does that compassion look like when we're being more gentle to ourselves? We're, forgiving ourselves for some of the hard things that we've actually put ourselves through. And like I said, I don't find that we validate ourselves a lot. Just really connecting with those thoughts that could be distressing for us and just saying, hey, right now I'm experiencing some distressing thoughts and I really need to be gentle with myself. And when I'm saying these things, do I have someone that I can reach out to, that I can confide in, that can help me learn how to manage those emotions and regulate myself? Who can I go to that will understand what I'm experiencing and help me manage through those challenging times? And if I don't have someone that could support me, how can I maintain some type of wellness? What is that plan that I need to create that helps me stay focused, helps me stay balanced, and helps me regulate my emotions? And going back to dose, are we implementing activities that really help us discharge some of that stress and some of those emotions that get built up? Because what happens when those things get built up? They turn into negative energy, which could be unhelpful in your body. So that's the thing that we have to think about. We might have one or two activities, and I know my parents are really big at, okay, when they're stressed, they're just going to book a ticket, they're going back home. But what if we don't have that luxury of being able to go somewhere all the time, right? We have to kind of think of things that we can do that are short, immediate, and realistic that just discharge some of that negative energy, so we can make room for the things that are helpful to us and make us feel good about ourselves, so that we can lead with more confidence. And that's it, like just being aware of your thoughts. Are you observing some of those things that come through your mind from day to day? And I know for me, I do a lot of self-reflection. And I think it's because I carry a lot of energy from other people, hearing their stories and trying to support them, working through their trauma. So what are you observing? What happens at the end of the day? Do you find that you really carry a lot of negative energy? Are you really into that fight or flight stage? Do you find that there's times when you're feeling hypervigilant and you have a lot going on and it's really hard to settle? What are those things that cause the hypervigilance? What are those triggers that are causing you to have those negative feelings or thoughts? How do you manage that? And the only way you're going to manage it is to notice it. Oh, I have a thought. And then you sit with it. And some of us really have a hard time sitting with our thoughts. Sometimes we like to react instead of just waiting a bit before we respond. And that is all based on, how we react to some of those triggers that come up, or some of those things that instantly cause us to have a reaction. Are we sitting with it? Are we absorbing it for a bit and just saying, okay, I feel this way. Maybe we need to discard it and just say, oh, it's not serving me. Or maybe we just need to really investigate and say, like, why am I thinking this way? Like, where is that coming from? Like, why am I triggered every time I see that phone number pop up on my phone? Right? What do they want now? Like, what is it that's causing me to have that distress or those distressing thoughts? And, once you get that thought in your mind, and it could be distressing, I'm like, yeah, I have a thought. And sometimes when we have it, we might be really anxious in that moment, and we want to either lash out, or we want to do so much to make that thought go away. When in fact, we need to just sit with it, because it might just be a temporary short-term thing, and it's just going to go away. Or I might put on my music, which my favorite is 90s dancehall. And once I put that on, I can't even think about all those things were pissing me off, because I'm thinking about all those good music and where I was at the time and how much fun I was having. And then I start to think, well, what I was thinking, was it all that bad? Or, sometimes I go out into nature because I'm so anxious about my presentation that I have. So I'm thinking, okay, let me go walk for a bit, keep myself calm. And then I'm out in nature. Things aren't as bad as I thought they were. And now I'm back and I'm ready to do this. So we're like, so when you're having that emotion, I'm saying it's okay to have it. And it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling. It's just, what are you doing with those emotions? Are you reacting? Or you're sitting with it and then you're like, you know what? Let me respond once I'm cooled down, when I'm no longer angry. And I think that's one of the hardest things for us to do, because I have that. There's days when I'm like lashing out. I'm like, I'm just got it. But now I'm able to say, you know what? I don't think that's fair, right? For people to have to feel my wrath because I'm pissed, right? Sometimes I just have to hold it and work those things through until I'm able to be rational and calm enough to have a conversation that would be mutually beneficial for the person, instead of yelling at them and throwing things, right? I could just say, you know what, I was feeling disappointed when I asked you 3 times to do this and you never did. Or something, we know how to use our language, right? When we really need to get our point across. We're not going to be accusing anybody. We're not going to be blaming them. We're going to be using those I statements, right? When I feel upset or I feel frustrated, when I'm talking and I feel like you're not listening, or I'm feeling like I'm being misunderstood. And I find that people will pay attention. Yes, the behavioral reactions gives you instant attention too. But when you're being more calmer, more rational, and accepting things for the way that they are, then it's more easier to deal with. And something that we don't do a lot, and I really encourage people when they are developing a routine, do you give yourself gratitude, and are you giving yourself grace? What are those things that you're saying to yourself when you've had a hard day, or you know that you went through a challenge and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got through this. Because 2 weeks ago, I was going through a stressful time. And today I can sit here as a testimony and say, whoa, look what I've been through and I made it. But are you giving yourself the gratitude? Are you giving thanks? Are you saying, oh my gosh, I know it was a hard time, but I got through it and I'm so thankful of what I learned. And even with children, this is what they want to hear. They want to be validated. They want to know that somebody heard them. Somebody's thanking them. Just even for you showing up in their presence. Some kids love it when you say, oh, I'm so glad that you came today. And it was so nice to see you. And thank you for showing up. And when you hear things like that, how does that make you feel when you receive it? When someone says, thank you for being there and showing up. And, you know, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, thank you that I was able to open up my eyes. Do you give yourself the gratitude? Do you thank yourself? That's part of the forgiveness and the healing that we need to give to ourselves in order to make ourselves feel brighter and to feel more in tune. Gratitude. And the compassion. Are you being gentle with yourself? Remember when we talked about those cognitive distortions of the would have and the must? That's a lot of blaming. But what if you just gave yourself some time and just said, you know what? It's okay. I learned the lesson. I wasn't feeling that great. I could have been angry. But you know what? I'm giving myself the gentleness and the kindness to say, you know what? It's okay if I had a little bit of a fault. I'm going to be gentle to myself. I'm not going to be hard on myself. I'm going to give myself some warmthness. I'm going to give myself some kindness. I'm going to validate myself. I'm going to give myself a warm hug, right? And sometimes we lose out on that oxytocin. And people will always say, love yourself, love yourself. But how? How? Right? It's by giving yourself compassion. It's about giving yourself gratitude and just being kind to yourself. And usually when we show that compassion towards ourselves, we can show compassion towards others. And also for people that are sad, what do they say to people that are sad, right? Sometimes in order for you to feel better is to be in service. So how are you in service to yourself and in service to others? And it's all about generating that compassion. And I think, like I said in the end, like creating that routine. So what are those things that you do in the morning or maybe late at night that really validates your day? And, you know, it just helps you stay in order and organized. Are you putting in gratitude in the morning? Are you giving yourself affirmations? What are those things that you do consistently to be gentle with yourself and to help yourself stay calm and relaxed and refreshed, right? It's part of our routine. Yes, we have a work routine, but what is your self-care routine? What are those things that you implement in your day that helps you recognize how you're feeling throughout the day? Do you do check-ins? And then what do you do at night to discharge that energy and just to give yourself some gratitude? And I set some time to write in my journal. I have two journals. One is my goal setting journal, and then the other one is my daily affirmations where I write them out. And then in my quiet time, that's what I'm doing. I'm affirming myself by saying, you know, I'm choosing me. I am happy. I am whole. I am full of abundance. I am wise. So I'm really saying those things in times of need when I'm feeling a little bit anxious or I feel like I'm losing my focus or direction, then I pull it back with my affirmations. Other people use prayer and they make that part of their daily routine. And they know that that's just their devotional time just to help fill themselves up with the love and the validation that they need so that they can go on another day. So how do you validate yourself? How do you discharge that energy? And do you do some time or write down some time to have some self-reflection so that you're looking at, hey, what went well today and what didn't? And how can I move forward and make it a better day tomorrow? And that's also a good exercise to do with young people or young adults, or maybe you and your partner at the end of the night. That's what you guys do. You just talk about, hey, you know, what went well in our day? What were the good things that we saw in each other? And what we can do just to make things better tomorrow. And that might be just one positive thing that you do for the day. And it really helps you, you know, enhance your relationship and really look at some positive things that are happening for the both of you, right? It's just to validate each other and to take that time out to make sure that you do that. And it makes a difference. And, you know, there's some other things that we can do. You know, reaching out, you know, joining special groups, learning a new skill, meditation. And, you know, these are things that help shift our negative thinking and just help give us some space to, you know, introduce something new and try something new and gain a new perspective. Because I find that once we have a different perspective, it really does help you change your thoughts. And you might not be thinking in the way that you did when you first started out and made it seem as a crisis. And now that you've really put some thought to it, you see it as an opportunity to really make a difference. And also you might have picked up a couple of things along the way that helps you. So the next time you get into a situation that might cause you some distress, you're going to say, oh, you know what? I'm feeling distressed. It is what it is. That's my reality right now. What can I do to change it to help me stay in a better mood and to change my perspective? Well, this is what you're going to be doing, right? You're going to be implementing some activities. You're going to be giving yourself gratitude. You're going to be accepting your reality. You're going to be giving yourself more compassion and kindness. All these things that you do just to be gentle to your mind reduces your stress so that you're able to cope with situations a little bit easier. And if you're still finding it difficult to manage and cope with those emotions, then please, this is why I'm here doing this presentation, so that you can reach out to me and reach out to the other therapists that are connected to Kajenga, and you can get some professional support in learning more about CBT and how we can actually apply some of these lessons to help you change your negative thoughts into things that are more helpful for you. So how does that sound? Does that sound something that's realistic and manageable and something that you can do? Because one thing is to go to these presentations, but which is great to have the information, but then are we going to be able to implement it when the time comes? Implement it for ourselves, implement it for our loved ones, and also for the people that we're working with. Because, hey, now we can say to them, oh, look at the way that you're thinking. That's a cognitive distortion. This is what you do to change your thoughts. Let's do an activity. Are you feeling better? Great. What do you think helped you change your perspective? And now that your perspective has changed, what can you do now that you have this new information? How can it enhance your life and enhance your mood?
Yeah.
And that concludes my presentation. And I hope that it was helpful for people. And yes, please reach out if you get stuck. But I really want us to start looking at how we pay attention to things and how we can help ourselves heal by implementing some strategies to help us manage our mood a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Alethia. That was great, very insightful.
Thank you.
And there was definitely a few sound bites that I am going to add to my tool belt.
That's helpful. I'm glad to hear that, because that's why I do these things, right? So the community can actually use them. And if it's helpful for them, then please incorporate it in your daily practice. Absolutely.
No,
Then let me know how it works.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I truly appreciate your attendance. Alethia, do you share slides or?
Yes, I do. I can give you guys a quick summary slide deck that I will share, and then people can have these notes that they can reflect on, and I'll give you a short exercise that you can do that helps you learn how to change those negative thoughts.
That would be greatly appreciated. And once you're able to send that off to me, we'll be able to distribute that to those who are interested.
Excellent. Wonderful. I'll send it to you soon.
Absolutely. So once again, thank you so kindly. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a wonderful weekend.
And thank you for coming. Please give yourselves a big hug and please do something good for yourself. You deserve it.